Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be just finishing off the Rathbones Prize by talking about the poetry shortlist. So the way the Rathbones is set up is there are three separate shortlists: the fiction, non-fiction and poetry. It used to be a prize where all three of those were all kind of wrapped up all in one, and this is sort of in some ways a bit of a replacement for the Costa Prize this year, where they've sort of separated it out this way. I am filming this before the winner has been announced, but this will be going out after the winner has been announced. So it may well be that one of these is the overall winner. I think they're doing a winner per category and then an overall, I think. Who knows? But really excited to be talking about these wonderful poetry collections nonetheless. I will specify right from the beginning, I am no real expert with poetry, but I sort of just try to let them wash over me and sort of try to see what kind of appealed to me in the best way. And that's what I'll be sort of going on with this. So first up, alphabetically, we have Quiet by Victoria Adukwei Bulley. And this is a collection of poems that really examines issues around race and sort of inner feelings, I guess, around that, kind of compared to the outside world. So it's split into two major parts, sort of a bit around white noise and a bit around black noise. Both parts really focus in on the way that sort of are the poet voice or the person telling these poems navigates through the world, and navigates their way through the world. And so sometimes that, for example, looks like really being sort of up against this sort of battering ram of noise and sound and everything around them. And at times there's this sort of real quietness, as the title suggests, of trying to find what peace looks like internally within the sections. I thought this was a really beautiful poetry collection, and unlike what I normally do with poetry, which is sort of to read the physical thing, I listened to an audio reading of this, which I think really helped in terms of hearing some of the pacing and the rhythm of these poems. But I suppose also has as a downfall that you kind of just hear it as one big bulk. It's sort of harder to pause and really take it in quite the same way. But still, I think a really interesting collection in terms of what it's doing. Next up, Ephemeron by Fiona Benson takes a very different outlook. So this is a set of poems that in many ways is broken up into quite big and quite different sections. The opening section is all about insects and sort of very small creatures, essentially. And it sort of looks at nature through their eyes and sort of makes them the central focus of the sort of narratives within the poems. And so it's really quite fascinating because you get these real deep dives into a moth and to examining a moth through this poem, or you maybe look at sort of other creatures. And there's something really beautiful about particularly the language of this. There's a real richness and sumptuousness to the writing. And it then moves on, and we have these other sections, including a sort of a bigger section, which is a retelling of a Greek myth, the Greek myth, particularly of the Minotaur. And so it's this really quite bizarre collection in that sense, because those things can feel very different. But there is a common thread that runs through in terms of this really gorgeous language talking about poetry, about nature and life, told in these very poetic terms. And so it's quite startling because you have the sort of beauty and fragility in some ways of this insect world. Then you have this brutality in the section around the Minotaur, and you know that's full of like assault and these really big horrendous themes. So there's something so startling and uncomfortable about this book that I think is really powerful as well. Next up, we have Cane, Corn and Gully by Safiya, Kamaria, Kinshasa. And this is a selection of poems that works in a really interesting way of particularly capturing a very Barbadian sort of rhythm and sort of dialect or patois or what have you. And so in doing so kind of carves out this real space of how people talk, and particularly looks at issues of race and class and empire, but also sort of really focuses on the sort of everyday of so many of these characters' lives, and particularly this idea of sort of inheritance sort of coming through, which I think is really powerful. And you know, not being as familiar with the Barbadian sort of patois or dialect, it was really interesting to see how the poems were sort of written in a way that really aims to capture that. And particularly, I saw something really interesting on Twitter about it, the kind of design that you'll hopefully see on the image of the book cover here, of these sort of little symbols. This was something that she also created to mirror the way that language was being used. So these are sort of, I'll try and dig it out and put a link to it in the comment bit below. But she essentially carved this out as an extra way of talking about how language and themes and all of those things cross over and are used. And it's basically, this is almost like a dance movement to go with the poetry. Which sounds more baffling than it actually is when you see her description of it, but a really fascinating idea, and I think such a kind of consummate activity going on within these poems to kind of carve out something very specific and very unique. Next up, we have England's Green by Zaffar Kunial. And I really loved this. I thought this was a very clever and interesting collection. It focuses on this idea of in and out. So the collection is split between sets of poems under in and under out. It uses that partly to talk about things like cricket, and hence the green of the title sort of also hints at a cricket green. He himself is Kashmiri, and so he talks a lot about how there's this sort of this sense of like, which part are you in, right? This sort of not only kind of reconciling kind of Kashmir as this sort of political piece, really, I guess, but also him as somebody in the UK and sort of reconciling identities, but also at the same time this in or out of cricket. It's really interesting, and again, like with so many of these other poets, the language is just so sumptuous and beautiful. These really vivid descriptions of nature and of place, which I just thought was really gorgeous and yeah, really sumptuous. And last but not least, Manorism by Yomi Ṣode. And this is a collection that really looks at black male sort of identity and masculinity, and it's really interesting for the ways it approaches various really complicated themes. So we've got a lot about political culture, and sort of this like a hostility around, but also how people react within those moments, the ways that those environments shape them and the ways that they shape environments. I thought it was really interesting and really clever. It kind of does a lot around him as a sort of him and kind of finding his place within this world. But then you also get bits, for example, like, let me find it, that almost read more like a mini novel of kind of, it's written in sort of blank prose instead of sort of in a more sort of typically poetic style. And so as a result, we get this real sort of sense of how he is talking about the kind of the various challenges that people might have around, particularly in sort of big city, like inner city lives, but also the ways that people navigate them in so many interesting ways. So there's a lot here about sort of what we pass down to others, how we sort of bring people up to survive in a world that's often quite hostile. And I just, yeah, I think it's also just, it's a really beautiful, if very angry in a rightful kind of way, collection. And I think that anger is channeled in such a beautiful way of understanding that this is such a really difficult place for some people to be able to live in and thrive in, and he sort of finds both community and love within that, but also he holds on to that fire, I think, in a really interesting way. And I think overall it's just, I mean, again, I am no expert with poetry. I've been sort of trying to broaden out and read a little bit more, but I think it's just such an interesting set of 5 books, the 2 of which I've got here as well being 2 that I really loved. I think it's just, yeah, it's really fascinating to see just such a breadth of poetry on display, and I think really showing that poetry is often this really often really at the vanguard of kind of this really exciting writing coming out, sort of really challenging a lot of norms, often in just really gorgeous language as well. So yeah, really highly urge you to read them and hopefully have deeper thoughts than I had here about them. And yeah, we shall see. The winner will already have been announced, so this will feel like a moot point, but these are excellent collections, and I really do urge you to check them out. I've been Bob the Booker. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye bye.